Okay, I am not going to show this in as a slideshow like you typically would if you were doing a presentation because it makes my screens go haywire and I'm not able to see everyone and see any questions that pop up. So hopefully everybody can see this. I can make it a little bigger, I believe. I don't want to make it too big so that things are cut out. But welcome. This is the first, well, actually, I take it back. This is the second uh, informational meeting about the new 21st Century Community Learning Center competitive grant for Cohort 27. The information that we're going to go over today is mostly exactly the same as what was gone over earlier this week at the ACEA conference. So if you attended that conference and you were in that session, then a lot of this information is information you've already seen, with except for just one change that we're excited to share with everyone today, and we'll get to that in just a little bit. Please keep in mind that the RFA is actually still, the request for application for this grant is actually still being worked on and hasn't been routed yet. But hopefully it will be routed within the next week or so. And we don't expect anything to change, but just keep in mind that change is possible once it is routed and has gone through all the many levels here at the State Department. If someone sees something they don't like, they may ask for a change. That probably will not happen. I don't expect that to happen. It didn't happen last year. Usually what holds up the RFA going through is minor grammatical, not even really errors, but just some people thinking that something should be said in a different way than we've said it in the RFA, or something like that. It's usually something very minor that gets changed. So what I highly recommend you to do is to take what you learned today and go ahead and start planning for the grant, especially going ahead and start working on your needs assessment. But we'll get to that in just a moment. This slide, this QR code, if you will use it, if you have not done so already, if you will use it to get into our listserv, to get added to our listserv, then that would be great. We sent an invitation for this meeting to all of our current 21st Century subgrantees and then anyone who had already joined the listserv, but we don't want to continue to blow up people's emails if they're not interested in the grant. Or if they already currently have a grant and don't plan to apply for this one. And so very soon we will start solely using this listserv to send out information about the grant. So highly recommend that if you're interested in this grant, that you go ahead and use that QR code to sign up for that. I also sent a link to that in yesterday's email, if that's easier for you. Maybe one of my people could put it in the chat. That would be great, from the email that went out yesterday. Let me introduce myself. I just realized I haven't done that. My name is Amanda Rolland. I am the state coordinator and federal programs administrator for the 21st Century program. Our team here at the ALSDE consists of Dr. Melissa McKinney, Dr. Kelly Smith, and Ms. Carla Wright. They are our ed specialists that help run this grant and are invaluable. And then Ms. Nia Marshall is our administrative assistant. So sometimes you may get emails from me. Sometimes you may get emails from Nia Marshall on behalf of us as a group. So if you see one of her emails come through, then just understand that that is legit and she is part of our program. And I'm sorry I don't have our TAs on this slide, but we also currently have 3 technical assistants that go out into the field. That would be Joseph Dyer, Kim Hendon, and Adrian Dennis. Usually we have more than 3, but we just ended a partnership and are about to embark on a new one with the University of South Alabama. And we are just waiting for the MOA to go through with that so that we can start that partnership. So hopefully we'll have more technical assistance in the field soon. Okay, so that is our staff. This is our federal programs number, and then you're welcome to reach out to any of our staff if you have questions. If you have questions about the grant itself, it may be best to reach out to me or to Nia, because we are the main ones that are going to handle these RFA meetings. Not to say that the rest of the staff isn't knowledgeable of the RFA, but they may not be aware of any like new changes to this RFA, or may not be as familiar with any changes to this RFA as I might be. All right, so let's talk about what is 21st Century. The Nina M. Lowy 21st Century Community Learning Center program is a federally funded program that supports the creation of community learning centers that provide academic enrichment opportunities during non-school hours for children. And it's focused on children who attend low performing and high poverty schools.
Amanda, we can't see your slides.
Oh, you can't?
No.
Well, it would help if I shared my screen. I'm so sorry. I wish somebody had told me earlier. Okay, hold on a second. So I tell you what, I'm going to, well, no, that's okay. We'll just keep going. I'm okay with mistakes. All right, let's see. Screen one. I apologize. Let me go back to that QR code so that you guys can scan that. I'm so sorry. Give you a second to do that. Again, this is the contact information for our staff. Hopefully you guys have had a chance to scan that. If not, I will put it up again at the end of the session. All right, now back to the slides. I'm so sorry. I did not realize I hadn't shared my screen. So back to this, Nita M. Lowy, 21st Century Community Learning Centers. The main goal of this program is to help students meet those state and local academic standards in our core academic subjects. So of course, your math, reading, English language arts, science, social studies, that sort of thing, especially focusing on reading and math. But it also offers opportunities to give students access to enrichment activities that they normally would not be able to do in a regular school program. And then also you can use these funds to provide services to the families of the participating children in the program. So what I mean by that is that you can even use these funds to provide like a class or a lesson for family members, like for example, a GED class. You could do something like that for the family members of participating children and fund it with 21st Century funds if you have the grant. So here's just a little bit of history about the 21st Century Grant. It began as a discretionary grant in 1998. It has been going for 27 years, and it is now it is a competitive grant that is filtered from the federal government to the states. And then we do, that part's not competitive. That's based off of our Title I funding. But then once the state has the funds, we have a competitive grant to determine who will receive those funds to serve their out of school time programming. Okay, so why should you apply for a 21st Century program? These are just a few quotes from different community members who have had students that have participated. One of the best things about this program is, of course, we want it to increase academic achievement and we want it to increase attendance at school, but we also really want to make sure that we're providing a very safe place for students to be after school, especially for students whose parents work or who would typically go home to an empty house. That is a huge part of this program. And there's just so many aspects, so many things that you can include in the program that can, increase student achievement and make a student a much more well-rounded child. But one of our big things is just providing a safe place for students to go that has adults there that care about those students. That's really important to us. All right, so let's go through the timeline of how this grant works. We will try to send this. I believe this has now been posted to our new 21st Century website, which was emailed to you guys yesterday, but we'll try to send this out again to the listserv. So we had our first meeting on November 17th, and then today we're having the second one, same basic grant information. And then we plan to have a more detailed informational meeting on December 1st, which is coming faster than I realized. So hopefully we'll be ready to have that. Again, the RFA is probably not going, well, I know it's not going to be released at that time, but we did this last year. We actually started having meetings before the RFA was released, and it worked out fine because just everything takes forever to route here at the State Department, and so we can't just keep waiting for things to be routed and be signed before we get started working on them, or we would never get our program started when they need to get started. Okay, I believe Melissa just put a link to our website in the chat. Okay, so that will be a more detailed meeting. It'll go over a lot of what today's meeting is going over, but it'll go into more detail about the application itself and the forms that have to be uploaded and that sort of thing. Then we'll start having application office hours. These office hours are, they're not mandatory. Anybody can attend them, and it's just a great place for you to come to ask questions about the grant. We don't normally have any, specific information we go over during each office hours unless something new comes up. But we highly recommend that everyone attends them or at least watches them after. We try to make sure that we record every office hour meeting and put it on our YouTube channel. So we highly recommend that you watch those because you just never know what's going to be asked in one of those RFA office hours that could actually benefit you when you're writing your grant. We try to also keep up with a FAQ sheet so that when questions are asked of us, especially like by email during the grant period, we can share the answers. We can share those questions and answers with everybody who is applying, and that way everybody hears the same information, and nobody gets information before someone else. Nobody gets additional information as to other people. Now, sometimes we put some of the questions that are gone over in the RFA office hours in that FAQ, but sometimes we don't. It just depends on probably how much time we have at that time. But those, we try to put them in there, but if we don't, we know that those recordings are there for you that you can watch and get that information from. So we highly recommend that you either attend those office hours or watch them afterward. And if you have questions about the grant, we highly recommend you attend them so that you can ask questions. We ask that you submit an intent to apply form by January 16th of 2026. You can go ahead and start submitting that now if you would like to. Actually, I could go ahead and put that in the chat. We ask that you don't submit it unless you know for sure that you are going to apply. So even though I'm going to put this in the chat, I would, if you're not certain yet, if this is still kind of up in the air as to whether you are going to apply or not, it would probably be best for you to wait until you know for sure that you plan to apply. So sorry, give me a second. I'll put that in the chat. Okay. Again, this is not a mandatory document. If you don't fill out the intent to apply, you are still qualified. You're still able to apply for the grant, but it really helps us if you do submit it so that we know how many peer grant reviewers that we need to hire. Every application has to go through a peer grant review process where each application is reviewed by at least 3 grant reviewers. And a lot of times these grant reviewers are from out of state. They're not necessarily associated with Alabama. We try to make sure that they are unbiased peer reviewers that have experience reviewing grants, reviewing 21st century grants. And so we need to know how many of those to hire, because I know in past grant competitions, sometimes the grant awards has been held up because not enough grant reviewers were hired, and they had to hire more, and the review process took longer than expected, and it actually caused the grant award notifications to go out much later than they wanted them to. So we try not to let that happen. So, so please, we would appreciate it if you would do that intent to apply form as soon as you know you do plan to apply for the grant. Then we continue to have more, the next major thing would be the EGAP application portal opening. We hope that this is going to be the correct date that the application will open, but again, these dates are subject to change. This is one that I am a little bit nervous about because we have had issues lately getting things uploaded into EGAP and changes made in EGAP. They seem to take substantially longer than they normally do. And so I'm a little worried that that application portal might not be ready by January 19th. If it's not, then we'll have to push back all of the dates to make them at a later time. We will make sure that we give you plenty of time to submit your applications. But again, don't wait until the EGAP application portal opens before you start working on the grant. Hopefully we will have the RFA out to you guys sometime probably in December, hopefully. But if you use these meetings, you should be able to go ahead and start planning and writing your narratives and things like that based off of what we're going to be going over in these informational meetings. And then you can just copy and paste them into the EGAP application portal when the time comes. So don't wait to the last minute to get that done. We will have a virtual EGAP application portal training on the day that the application opens up. Hopefully it'll be January 19th from 2 to 4, where we will go over step by step how to get into EGAP and how to submit your application. We will have another RFA application office hours on January the 29th. Peer reviewer applications will be due January 30th. More RFA application office hours in February. And then as of right now, the plan is for the application to be due at the end of February on February the 27th at 11:59 p.m. Okay. We put that date and time into the EGAP system, and after 11:59 p.m., it will not let anyone else submit an application. So please do not wait until the last minute or the last day to submit your application or finalize your application. We had several people or organizations last year who applied for the grant. They waited to the last day to finalize their applications. And when you do that, it has to be finalized by several different people. It goes through kind of a routing system that ends sometimes with your superintendent if you're an LEA. So if one of those people is out of town or can't access their computer, their internet goes down, anything like that, and they're not able to hit that button that says they approve it, then you risk not having your application submitted on time, and that date and that time is final. It's not flexible. Okay, so please, we highly recommend that if you can, to try to finalize your application maybe a week before this date, if you can. So that way, if anything happens as far as internet access or someone needing to be able to approve it, you've got plenty of time to get that done, and you don't risk going through all this trouble to create an application and then not having it finally submitted by the due date. So if everything goes according to plan, our peer reviewers will score those applications between March 3rd and April 3rd. And then we hope to submit the grant winners to the Federal Programs Director and State Superintendent for approval by April the 10th. And then hopefully we will announce our grant winners sometime in late April or early May. Again, all that just depends on routing situations, but that's the goal. We would love to let you know whether you got the grant before the end of the school year so that you can go ahead and start making preparations for people to attend trainings. You can go ahead and start hiring people for the program for the next year. So that is our goal. Hopefully we will meet it. Can't guarantee it for sure, but that is definitely our goal. And this is just my little blurb that just says, we intend to stick to this timeline as closely as we can, but if we have unforeseen delays, then the dates may have to be extended. So we highly recommend that you refer to the RFA timeline and grant information in our website, which is, here's the link here, our 21st Century website. To make sure that the deadlines and things have not changed. Of course, we will try to let people know in those office hour meetings. But I found in last year's competition that a lot of people didn't attend those. And then at the very end, we're asking lots of questions and we're uncertain about things. And so please try to attend those if you can. But if at the bare minimum, please make sure you check in with the 21st Century website to look for any kind of updates for the competition. Okay, so let's talk about the purpose of this grant. Our biggest purpose is to provide academic enrichment, including tutoring services, and we have to prioritize providing this for students who attend low-performing schools, and the goal is for them to be able to meet those challenging state academic standards and local academic standards. Also, our purpose is to offer students a broad array of additional services, programs, and activities. So I don't want to read all these to you, but just some of the things that we ask that you can do with this program is you can do youth development. We require that you do service learning projects. You can teach kids about health and nutrition, drug and violence prevention, counseling, ed tech programs, financial literacy. Of course, you can go over, you can have literacy, math, science, career tech programs. You can fund and encourage internships or apprenticeships at your higher levels. You can pay for students to get at higher levels to get certified in certain things like IT certifications. So there's just all kinds of things that you can do with this grant, which is what makes it so great. And then, of course, I've already mentioned this, you can also offer the families of the students that you're serving opportunities to have to be active and have meaningful engagement in their children's education, but also you can provide to those families literacy activities for them and any other kind of educational development to actually benefit those family members of those students, not just the students themselves. All right, what everybody wants to know is the general funding information, and this is where we're going to have a little bit of a change of what was talked about on Tuesday. We'll get to that in a second. So right now, it looks like we're going to have somewhere between $9 and $11 million to distribute during this Cohort 27 grant. I know that's kind of a big range, but right now we're actually in the process of closing out FY25, and I'm waiting for accounting to let me know exactly how much money has been spent and we have remaining from FY25 funds that will be carried over to next year and that sort of thing. So until I know that, I won't know exactly how much money we will be giving out, but it should be somewhere in the $9 to $11 million range. These award amounts are going to be based on a formula that is based off of the proposed number of students that you're going to serve and the total number of program hours you plan to serve them. For this year, the grant awards will range from $50,000 to $350,000 per site per year, and it will be a 4-year grant. Okay, so slightly different than last year's grant. Last year it went a little higher, but because of that, we were not able to give out as many awards as we have in past years, and so we decided to bring it back down a little bit, back down to the $350,000 range. That's where most of the grants fell into last year anyway. But we just want to be able to provide the grant to as many people or as many sites as possible. And we decided to do a 4-year grant instead of a 5-year so that the cohort 26 and 27 roll off at the same time so that we can have kind of one large grant competition every 5 years. But we do plan to have smaller grant competitions between those bigger ones whenever funds tend to collect and like if people don't spend out all of their funds, or if for some reason their funding is reduced, and we see that we have a good pot of fund, like a good pot of funds that we can give out in a grant, then we'll have like a smaller grant competition during those times. Applicants can apply for a year-long program, which means they're going to serve students both during the academic year and the summer, or they can just apply to serve students during the summer or just during the academic year, okay? But if you do choose to write for a summer-only program, you won't actually be able to start your program until the summer of 2027. So your grant will actually start at the beginning of next school year, and you'll actually have access to funds July 1st of next summer, but that would be a pre-award cost type funding situation. We're going to talk about that in a moment. Your actual true funding, you will not get it until October 1st of 2026. And so you would not be able to really start your summer only program until the summer of 2027, if that's what you choose to apply for. You can also apply for an additional transportation allowance. This is if you plan to provide transportation home, like for your school, if you're doing out of school time, or if you're doing after school programming. If you want to take the kids home at the end of the day, use the buses to do that, then you can get either $10,000 if you're urban, or if you're categorized as a rural community, then you can get $20,000 for transportation. You can also get this extra money if you plan to run a summer program and you plan to pick up kids and take them home each day from your summer program. So this was a need that we were told that this was a need last year, and so we added it to the application. And so far, it's worked out really great, and enables us to serve those students much better. All right, so here's where it gets a little confusing, and I'm going to try my best to explain how the funding works in the first year of the grant. So you're actually expected to begin your program the first full week of the 2026-27 academic year, okay? That is what the federal regulations state, is that you should begin your programs at the beginning of the year, and that's what we're trying to stick with. Unfortunately, our fiscal calendar does not match the federal government's education fiscal calendar. So for education funds, the federal government actually gives funding to the states on July 1st each year, usually. Sometimes it gets held back a little bit, but we won't go there right now. This happened this past summer. Hopefully that won't happen to us again. But usually we get our funding on July 1st from the feds. But here in the state of Alabama, our fiscal year runs from October 1st to September 30th of each year. So even though we have the funds from the feds, we can't distribute those funds typically until October 1st. But for new programs, how would you start your school year if you can't get funding until October 1st? So we had this issue come up this past year. I'm not going to go into why all the past things, but we had to come up with a solution to the problem and enable new subgrantees to get money as early as July 1st so that they could attend required trainings and so that they would have money to pay employees and buy materials and things like that so they could start their program the first week of school, first full week of school. We used to say first day of school, but we know a lot of schools kind of start on a Wednesday or a Thursday, and so we decided to make it the first full week of school. You can start it before then if you would like to. So what we have to do is we will use some of our carryover funds from FY25 to fund pre-award costs. So if you get the grant and you are a current 21st century subgrantee, so let's say that right now you have a Cohort 17 grant and your grant ends on September 30th of 2026, okay? What we will do for you guys, if you get the grant again, same site gets the grant again, then we will, if you need it, we will add some of our Cohort 25 carryover funds to your current grant to help you get through the first couple of months of your new grant year. Okay, so you won't have to really do anything additional other than once we give you kind of those, if you need the supplemental funds, sometimes sites don't spend out all their funds and may not need any additional funds. But if you do need additional funds to be added, we will add them as though it's a supplemental grant to help you with pre-award costs to carry you in your first year of your new grant until September 30th. And we'll add that to your current application. And only thing you'll have to do is just do a budget revision to budget those additional funds. However, if you are a new subgrantee, you don't currently have a Cohort 17 grant, and you're applying for the first time, or you just for whatever reason you don't have one right now, and your funding will start October 1st, then the only way that we can give you funds prior to that is that you will have to go into EGAP and complete what's called a Cohort 27 pre-award cost application. We had to do that this year for Cohort 26. It's been a kind of a pain this year because, again, getting something built in EGAP took a really long time, but hopefully because it's already been built, it just can be copied and pasted into the new year for next year, so that shouldn't be a problem. So as soon as you know you have the grant, then we will send out kind of a survey saying how much funding will you need to carry you through summer training and the first 2 months of your program, to carry you through September 30th. And then once you let us know how much of your funding that you were awarded you need, we will have that uploaded into that pre-award cost application, and then you will just basically budget it. We will approve it, and then you'll have access to those funds to be able to start drawing them down. It's kind of a pain. It's an extra step that we've never had to ask sites to do in the past, but it's the only way that accounting would allow us to give funds early, give funds to you guys early prior to the beginning of the new fiscal year. And then once the fiscal year starts, the FY27 fiscal year starts, then you will just carry on as normal with the rest of your grant funds. Please keep in mind, though, that all of these grants the subgrant payments are based on a cost reimbursement basis. So you spend the funds and then you submit your expenditures to the state, and then we reimburse you for them. And sometimes that process can take some time. If you're a CBO, for example, or an FBO, if you're an organization other than an LEA and you have a grant, then we at the State Department, we in our 21st century team actually wants to see your expenditures, see your invoices and things like that, and check those to make sure that that you followed all of the required federal guidelines. So that can take a little bit of extra time. And then once we approve it, we forward it on to accounting, and then they can approve it and you can get your reimbursement. So the reason why I say all this is that we highly recommend that all applicants have at least 3 months of operating funds at their disposal to compensate for any delays that may occur in receiving reimbursements. Okay, so you know in advance that you are going to have to begin your program with your own money, and then you can be reimbursed. And sometimes that takes some time. So you really need to have at least 3 months of operating funds at your disposal. All right, so how much funding can you get? Here's where we're going to have a little bit of a change. So in last year's grant, we're doing the same thing we did as last year's grant with just a slight twist on it. So the funding is going to be awarded based on a funding formula. That formula is the same as last year. So you will take the number of participants you plan to serve. You will multiply that times the number of program hours you plan to serve them. You have to serve, your program during the school year has to at least be 300 hours. It can be more than that. And then you multiply that by $6. And then that will give you the amount that you're eligible to receive. Now, if you plan to serve a lot of students for a lot of hours, then your eligible amount may go over the maximum of $350,000, but that is the max. So you would not get the additional funds. You would get $350,000 if, that would be the max amount you can get other than the transportation allowance. You can get an additional up to $20,000 for transportation on top of that $350,000, but that's not included in this funding calculation. So here's a couple of examples. Let's say that a program plans to serve 100 participants. They're going to run their program for 300 hours. You multiply 100 times 300 times $6, and that means that that program is eligible to receive $180,000 for their grant. Okay. Here's another example. Let's say you're going to serve 50 participants for 75 program hours. So let's say you're just doing a summer program. The minimum number of hours you can serve students during the summer is 75. So let's just say you want to do a quick summer program. You would multiply 50 times 75 times $6, and that actually calculates to $22,500. Now, the problem with this is that you would not be able to get this grant because the federal regulations state that awards have to be a minimum of $50,000. So you have to at least serve the number of students for the number of hours it takes for you to get to $50,000 in order for you to qualify for the grant. Okay. All right. So here's our slight change from what we've been saying. There was a question about daily average attendance. It's come up several times since last year's grant, and because in last year's grant we said that you had to maintain a certain number for your daily average attendance. So that it still applies now, but we're no longer going to call it daily average attendance. We're going to call it something different. Okay, so we'll get to that in just a second. All right, so your programs must maintain a minimum of 75% of their approved enrollment in year 2 and 85% of their approved enrollment in years 3 and 4 in order for your program to continue to get your full grant award each year. So what that means is, let's say you said you were going to serve 100 students. The first year of the grant, we understand that it's a new grant. You're still learning. You're still trying to get your student attendance numbers. You may be still trying like new programs and implementing new ideas. And so we don't penalize you in the first year if you don't meet your attendance your attendance minimums that you said you were going to serve in your application. But at the end of the second year, if your student attendance is less than 75% of what you said you were going to serve, then we are going to reduce your funding for the next year, that would be year 3, to the actual attendance numbers that you are serving. Well, how do we know what attendance numbers are we going to look at? Okay. This is where the confusion has lied. And I have spent several days looking up guidance from the feds, looking at what other states do, just kind of going into, as much research as I could to try to figure out a fair and equitable way to do this. Because for elementary, saying your daily average attendance is typically fine because most of the time the same kids come every day for your elementary programs, and it's pretty regular. But for middle and high school, that's really not the case. Sometimes kids only come once a week or twice a week. Sometimes they only come during certain seasons. Maybe they have football in the beginning of the year, so they only participate the second half of the year. There's just all kinds of things to take into consideration. And so we've been trying to think of a way to make this fair. And I think we've come up with a good way to do this. But you're welcome to send me an email if you don't think this will work. And we will definitely take that into consideration. But this is what we're leaning to right now. So the feds actually have what they call regularly attending students. They actually have kind of a guideline when you're talking about student reporting and things like that, the reporting of data of what they consider a regularly attending student. And for a program that typically lasts for 300 hours, they believe that a regularly attending student attends a program somewhere between 45 hours and 89 hours during the school year. Well, if you do the math and you look at the lowest number they say is a regularly attending student or regularly attending a participant, which would be 45 hours, then that's 15% of the program hours, right? So if you have a 300-hour program and you're saying that a regularly attending student is a student who attends at least 45 hours, that's saying the same as they attend at least 15% of the program. And since that's what the feds say, we feel like this is a good thing for us to use to determine your attendance numbers at the end of the year. So at the end of the year, what we will count is all for during this, well, really for during the school year, during the summer, or both, we will count the students who attended at least 15% of the hours that you offered. So if you offered 300 hours, any student who attended programming at least 45 hours will be counted towards your attendance, okay? And that is the number we will use to determine if you continue to get the same funding as next year, okay? So again, hopefully I'm explaining this well, but we will look at your regularly attending participants. It'll work the same way for the summer. Let's say you're doing a summer program and you're serving kids for 75 hours, that you're offering 75 hours of programming. Well, if I use my calculator, 75 times 0.15, any student who attends at least 11.25 hours will be counted towards the attendance for the summer, the funding for that as well. Okay, if it's a whole year, you would just add those numbers together. All right, so that's how we will determine. We'll probably come up with some sort of form that will need to be filled out to determine that you have met your attendance goals at the end of the year. But again, you guys will not have to worry about this until the end of the second year of the grant. But this is probably the best way for us to make it equitable for everyone, whether it's elementary to high school. And, it will be based off of each program and the hours they're offering. Thank you, Jennifer, for the comment. I'm glad you agree. I'm glad you like it. All right. Also, keep in mind that your award amount is also based off of the number of hours of operation. So sometimes people get a little overzealous in the hours they say they're going to run their programs when they're doing their application, and they may go a little high with it. But then when it comes down to actually hiring staff and getting people in there, they might need to reduce their numbers. So if at any time the hours of operation reduces, then in the next year of the grant, we will again use that formula to calculate what your grant should be the next year based off of the actual hours that you plan to offer for the students. Okay, this is just the most fair way we can think of to give you guys funding and make it fair across, instead of everybody gets the same amount, bigger programs get more money, smaller programs will get less, and it would just be hopefully more equitable and more fair. All right. Any questions about that before I move on? All right. Let's talk about continuation awards. So if you get this grant, it will be for 4 years, but every year you don't automatically get the money each year. You have to do a continuation application each year to get the next year's funding. Okay. Now, not only do you have to complete your continuation application, but the DOE highly pushes for us at the state level to make sure that you are meeting criteria such as making progress towards your goals and objectives, that you make sure that you've been submitting all your required reports and data on time and according to the rules and regulations of the grant, that you maintain sufficient financial systems. All of this is supposed to be considered before awarding the next year's grant. So just please note that each year, as long as you do what you're supposed to do and follow the rules and regulations, you should be fine in getting your money for the next year. But if you constantly have compliance issues and we see that the students are not meeting the goals and objectives that you put forward in your grant, then there is a possibility that your grant could that you may not get grant funds for the following year. So please just make sure that that you are doing what you're supposed to do so that we don't have to do that. We don't want to do that, but the federal government really does push for this and push that we hold sites and subgrantees accountable for the rules and regulations of the grant. And that's what we intend to do. Here's another change for this grant is that we will we will not allow costs to be carried over from one year to the next. This may change slightly. I need to have a conversation with Dr. Killingsworth, the Director of Federal Programs. I haven't had a chance to talk with her about this yet. We may allow like a small percentage of it to carry over, but I know for sure it won't be a large amount of money being allowed to be carried over from year to year. And the reason for this is that in the past, carryover funds have kind of snowballed and gotten out of control. And if we allow carryover from one year to the next, and then that site again doesn't spend their funds out, by the time we know that they haven't spent those carryover funds, it's time for us to revert them back to the federal government, and then we lose money. As I said, we revert funds back to the feds, and that looks really, really bad on our state, and it looks really bad for just 21st century programs across the nation. Why would Congress continue to fund us if we're not spending the funds that they give us, right? And so we have to be really careful not to send money back to the feds. And the best way we can do that is to not allow carryover so that we know how much money we have going from year to year. And it gives us time to either spend out those funds by doing supplemental grants or by doing another grant competition or something to that effect. But it doesn't put us in a position where we might end up having to send funds back to the feds. And so that's the reason why that decision was made. I wanted to make it last year and someone talked me out of it and I regretted it. I've regretted it ever since. And so we definitely are doing it with this grant competition. All right, who's eligible to apply for this grant? Really anybody, to be honest with you. Any public or private organization is eligible to apply. So here's some just examples of different types of organizations that tend to apply for this grant. So of course you've got schools or school districts. We call them local education agencies or LEAs. An example of that would be like Arab Elementary School and in the Arab city school system. Also, you could have a community-based organization. An example of one of those would be a Boys and Girls Club of South Alabama. You can have FBOs, which is faith-based organizations. An example of one of those would be the Pilgrim Rest Missionary Baptist Church. So, and then you can also, I don't give that as an example here, but you can also have like for-profit organizations that can apply for the grant as well. Municipalities. There's a very large list that will be in the RFA of different types of organizations that can actually apply for this grant. All applicants must demonstrate how they propose to target students who primarily attend schools that are eligible for school-wide programs under Title I. There's other numbers here, Section 1114 of ESEA and their families. That's really just Title I. So when you are determining what students you're going to serve, especially if you're a CBO or an FBO, you have to primarily target students who attend a Title I school or a school that is actually eligible for Title I services. So sometimes in an LEA or in a local education agency, a school will actually meet all the federal requirements to be a Title I school, but that LEA may choose not to serve that school with Title I funds because maybe they want to focus their funding on something else, like another school or like their elementary schools. So let's say you could have like a high school that actually technically qualifies as a Title I school, but the LEA has decided to make their elementary schools a priority. And so instead of serving that high school, they choose to serve their elementary schools instead. And so even though that high school qualifies as a Title I school, they're not considered Title I because their LEA chose not to serve them. That is fine if that's the case. So it can be that's basically what these three bullets or these three numbers are stating, is that it can be a Title I school, it could be a Title I school that receives a waiver from the state education agency to operate a school-wide program, or it could just be a non-title public school that has 40% or more poverty, which would typically qualify them to be a Title I school. All right, we also have competitive priorities. These are slightly different than last year's competitive priorities, but not very much. Priority 1 is that applications must be submitted, or priority 1 goes to applications that are submitted jointly. So if you're an LEA and you're submitting an application, you will get an additional 5 points if you submit your application jointly with another organization. Okay. Now, if you're a CBO or an FBO, or you're an organization outside of being an LEA, you are actually required to submit your application jointly with an LEA. You have to have a partnership with the LEA you serve. And we'll talk about that in just a little bit, but there's reasons for that, why organizations outside of LEAs have to partner with the LEA that the students attend. And we'll talk about that in just a little bit. But if you're not an organization, let's say you're an LEA and you're applying for the grant, you will get these priority points if you decide to partner with another eligible entity. And you have to show that you planned your grant in conjunction with that organization, and that both parties plan to serve those students actively as part of the program. It can't be that you just put down the name of an organization just to get those extra 5 priority points. It has to be very obvious that both organizations, both the LEA and the outside organization, has worked together to write the grant, and then they plan to serve the students together if you get the grant. Okay. The next priority goes towards schools that are in improvement status. So 5 bonus points will be awarded to applications that propose to serve students who attend a school that is currently, right now, in this school year, designated by the ALSDE as being CSI, TSI, or ATSI. Okay? And the definitions of how those schools are determined is below. So a CSI school is identified as being in the bottom 5% of Title I schools or has a graduation rate at or below 67%. TSI schools are schools with one or more subgroups that are at or below 75 percentile of CSI schools with no improvement after 2 years. And then you have ATSI schools that are schools with one or more subgroups that are in the bottom 5% of Title I schools. So if you are going to serve a school that is CSI, TSI, or ATSI, then you would qualify for this priority, and you will mark that in the application. And we do check it. We do spend quite a bit of time going and looking up and make sure that the schools that you said you're serving, at least one of them is a school that's in improvement status. Priority 3 is the ESSA targeted service priority. This is actually a requirement of the feds. 5 bonus points will be awarded to applications that will enroll students who may be at risk for academic failure, dropping out of school, involvement in criminal or delinquent activities, or who lack strong positive role models. So in order to qualify for this one, you would need to provide some sort of evidence or documentation that the community you're serving maybe has a high crime rate, has a high dropout rate, maybe has a high rate of only like one parent families or children that are raised by someone other than their parents. That's the kind of information you would need to provide in your application in order for you to qualify for this 3rd priority. Priority 4 is to expand services across the state. So 5 bonus points will be awarded to applications that demonstrate that the proposed activities that they plan to do in their program are not accessible to students. Actually, I said that wrong a minute ago. It's not. Next one is about expanding services across the state. This one is about expanding activities and services and accessibility within your community, okay? So you're proposing in your application that you're going to provide services that either students don't have access to in your community or have limited access to, and you're going to expand that accessibility. So just to give an example, let's say that in your community, you have a small community and there is only one public pool in the community where kids can really go to learn how to swim, but that pool is owned by a private country club, and only families that are high income really have access to that pool and have access to those swimming lessons. Well, you could propose in your 21st century program that you are going to pay for students to have access to that pool, or maybe to a pool that's nearby, like at a local YMCA or something like that. Probably the country club is not the best thing to use, but it could just be the YMCA, because there is typically a cost involved in joining the YMCA. So let's say that the only pool nearby is a YMCA, and you are going to partner with YMCA to pay for your students to be able to go during the summer to have swimming lessons once or twice a week at the local YMCA. Well, if you do something like that, then you would qualify for priority 4. Another example would be, let's say that you're in a small community and there isn't like a dance studio for kids to take dance lessons. No ballet, nothing like that. And you want to bring in a professional dance teacher and equipment to provide dance lessons to your students. That would qualify you for priority 4. Providing something to the students that they typically would not have access to, or expanding their accessibility to services that they typically wouldn't have access to. But please make sure you explain that, and that you're very obvious about it in your application so that we know for sure that you actually qualify for that priority. And then the last priority is increasing geographic equity. You can get 5 points. 5 points will be awarded to applications that propose to serve an eligible school or schools in Alabama or in an Alabama public school district that does not have a 21st century grant in the 25-26 school year. So right now, during this school year, that LEA is not served by a 21st century grant. Okay, so let me make that clear. It's not just the site hasn't been served, it's the LEA itself, because the federal government wants us to provide geographical equity. There are even some states who actually score their applications based on where they're located in the state. So, for example, they even when they get the scores of the applications, they give the first grant to the highest score in Region 1, and then they give the next grant to the highest score in Region 2, and then the next grant the highest score in Region 3. Okay, just to make sure that the grants are equally distributed across the state. I don't really want to do that because I feel like that would be unfair to areas that have a lot of people apply versus areas that have hardly anyone apply. But the federal government requires for us to do something to expand or to increase our geographic equity. So these priority points will go to an LEA that doesn't currently have a program anywhere in the LEA, doesn't currently have a 21st century program anywhere in that LEA. Okay. For now, those are all of our priorities. We are considering adding one more, but I don't want to mention it yet just in case it doesn't happen. But we will let everyone know. Hopefully we'll know by the next meeting on December 1st exactly if there's going to be another priority added or not. But for now, we know that these are going to be the 5 priorities that are going to be part of the application. Now, I don't think I said this in this week's earlier presentation, but you do have the priorities are actually added after the rest of your application is scored, and so you do have to meet a minimum score before the priorities are applied. So I can't remember off the top of my head what that cutoff score is right this second, but you have to meet that minimum cutoff score. And then if you don't meet that minimum, then your application is immediately disqualified. If you do meet that minimum or higher, then we add the competitive priorities after that. And then we determine who gets the grant based on their score and ranking. Okay, so there are specific regulations and requirements that have to be adhered to as part of this grant because it is a federal grant. It does have a lot of hoops you have to jump through, just being honest about that. You have to propose projects that adhere to federal regulations, statutory requirements, and state level program requirements, and those will be outlined in the RFA. A lot of them are based on EDGAR, GEPA. These are all federal rules and regulations that you have to meet. And then some of them are program requirements that we have put in place here at the state of Alabama. You do have to have an academic focus. That needs to be your main priority, is an increase in academics. And so applicants must propose at least weekly, and I think this is new from last year as well, applicants must propose to have at least weekly academic instruction and enrichment activities in English language arts, reading, and math at all grade levels. Okay, so last year that was a priority that was given. If you did that, this year it's a requirement. This is another big push from the federal government that, yes, 21st century is about providing fun activities for students, but the primary goal is still academic achievement and an increase in attendance and decreases in poor behavior. So we have to focus on that academic achievement. So we're not going to mandate how long those activities have to be, but you do have to do something weekly in those subject areas. You can add additional ones to that as well. You can do science, you can do social studies, you can do other topics as well, but the requirements, the weekly requirements are English language arts, reading, and mathematics at all grade levels that you plan to serve. Okay. All services must be provided outside of the regular day or during periods when school is not in session. And this is for students. So you can have services before school, after school, evenings, weekends, holidays, summer. You can do that, anytime that school is not in session, you are able to offer programming to students. Most people just do after school programming or summer programming. Sometimes people will do Saturday schools, but that's typically it. Every now and then somebody will have a small program in the morning, but usually it's after school or summer. The only exception to that rule is you could do activities that are targeting adult family members of the students you're serving, and you could have those activities during school hours. So, I mentioned earlier that you could have a GED class for family members of the students. You could actually do that GED class during the school day because it's going to be adults that are no longer in school that are attending that class, and not your typical students. And so that is okay. You could have a parenting class. You could have an English language, an EL class for your English language learners. If you have a large population of English learners in your region. Any of that doesn't have to necessarily be done after school. It could be done during the day as long as all of the participants are adults, and are not school-age children. Keep in mind that if services are to be provided in a location other than a public school, the location must be as available, safe, conducive to learning, and accessible as a public school. Most of the time, most programs do operate in a public school, even if the subgrantee is a community-based organization or a faith-based organization, but every now and then they don't. Every now and then a program may run at the local YMCA, or it may run at the Boys and Girls Club, or it may run at a local church. If that's the case, you have to, there's some evidence you have to provide to show that that is a safe environment. And we may even come inspect the building that you plan to have your 21st century program in before approving your award. So just keep that in mind. But it's always a good, if you can do it at a local public school, that's always probably your best option, because you know that those have to meet certain requirements for safety and things like that. So that's like your easiest option. Private schools also don't necessarily have to meet any rules and regulations, so those would also need to be inspected, and make sure that they meet all the safety standards and things like that. Speaking of private schools, you do have to provide equitable services for private school participations. So for those of you that may not know what equitable services is, the federal government says that anytime federal grant money is given out to public schools, students who attend private schools that would typically go to that public school also should have equitable access to those funds. And so if you are going to run a 21st century program out of school, and that there is a private school that is within the attendance area of that school the public school you plan to serve, you also have to reach out to that private school and let them know that you plan to apply for a 21st century after school time grant. And you have to consult with them to see what the needs of their students are, and you have to offer for their students to be able to attend the after school program also. Okay. That is a requirement. You cannot give special treatment to public school students over private school students. So for example, you can't, like if you have a student application that has to be filled out, when it becomes available to your public school students and families, you have to make sure it's also available to your private school students and families. Okay. You have to treat them equitably. If you're providing transportation from the public school home, like if you're transporting students from the after school program to their homes after the program is over each day, then you also need to be able to provide that transportation to the private school students within reason. So if that private school student for some reason lives outside of your attendance area, then you would have to have kind of a pickup location where you would drop this child off for their parents to pick them up. But it would need to be within your attendance area. So that's just something that you're supposed to offer as part of your equitable services participation. Also, if you are reached out to by homeschooling parents, then you are also obligated to serve those students as well. I don't think we have that happen very often. I'm not saying you have to reach out to homeschool parents in your area or anything like that. That is not, the feds do not say that that is a requirement. But if a homeschool parent comes to you and says, I would like my child to be able to come to your after school program, and you have room for them, then you have to let them come. There's usually questions about, well, how do we get data on that child, like testing data and things like that for reporting. If that's the case, we'll come up with a plan when it happens. You may have to give that child like some sort of pre and post assessment, something like that. Again, this doesn't happen very often, but just know that just know that it could happen and have a plan in place in case it does happen. Okay, so applications or applicants must address the following 6 focus areas in their objectives for the proposed 21st century program. You have to address academic achievement and student engagement and learning in ELA, reading, and mathematics. Those are required. You can also add other core subject areas if you would like, or just other subject areas in general. You have to focus on student attendance during the regular school day. You may think to yourself, well, how does attending the 21st century program affect attendance during the school day? Well, if your students are excited and eager to come to the after school program, you should have a rule in place that they can only attend the after school program if they attended school that day. And that way, students, if they're excited about your program, they're going to be more likely to come during the school day so that they can participate in your after school program. Also, behavior during the regular school day. We encourage sites to do behavior activities, to do SEL learning and teach students social skills and conflict resolution and things like that, so that hopefully it will benefit their behavior during the school day and students will be better at not getting into fights and not having bad behavior during the school day so that they can participate in the after school program or the summer program coming up. We also ask that you focus on holistic health and wellness, and that can look however you want it to look at your site. We don't mandate exactly what you have to do, but there's a lot of activities that could fall under holistic health and wellness. You could do physical activities, you could have sports, you could have dance, karate, tennis, golf, anything like that. You could also do mental health type activities, have a counselor come in and work with students who might need that kind of help. You can do, of course, again, the SEL activities, social emotional learning. And then you can have nutrition activities, and you could have a cooking class that teaches students how to cook nutritional meals. You can have activities that teach kids how to read the nutrition labels on the back of their food so that they understand that that bag of chips, even though it's 180 calories, well, that bag is actually 5 servings. And so it's actually more like 1,000 calories for that bag of chips. And so things like that, you can make that look however you need it to look based on the needs of your students in your community. And then finally, we ask for you to focus on parent and family involvement and enrichment. So we require that you do a certain number of family involvement activities to bring parents in and help learn with their students and be involved in their students' learning, but also we encourage enrichment programs for those family members, again, based off of the needs of the community and the needs of those family members. Do keep in mind, though, that if you are going to offer activities for family members of the students, it does have to be a family member. It can't just be any adult from the community. We've had that question pop up before. So if you have adults in the community that say, if I can use the same example as before, that need a GED, they have to be a member of one of the students' families that you're serving in your 21st century program in order for you to allow them to participate in that activity. All proposed 21st century programs have to, at minimum, provide direct after-school services to students for a minimum of 300 hours over the course of the academic year, and or a minimum of 75 hours for summer programming. So I've already mentioned that. If you're going to do an academic year program, it has to at least be 300 hours, which is kind of minimum. A lot of programs are more in the 450-hour range. It does have to last 36 weeks, so it needs to begin the first full week of school and end the last week of school, which typically is a 36-week program. And then during the summer, you just have to have a minimum of 75 hours. And those summer hours can look however you feel works best for you. We highly encourage sites to braid funds and work with your ARI and your math funds to provide a really robust summer program and after school tutoring program, if you get funds for that. And not compete with those math and reading camps, but instead work together to provide a really robust and great camp for all of the kids that come that summer. And that way, the kids that have to have those remediation classes can also experience doing fun activities and enrichment and going on field trips. And then hopefully the other students who maybe don't need the enrichment, but we don't want them to lose learning during the summer, you can provide maybe some less intensive math and reading activities for them to do as well, so that kind of everybody is both having academic activities and enrichment activities, and you just really create a really robust summer program that way. Okay, regulations and requirements. Subgrantees are not allowed to charge students and their family members any fees. Okay, so if you are currently running a summer program, an after-school program or a summer program that you typically would charge a fee for, and you want to apply for a 21st century grant, you will no longer be able to charge a fee for students to participate. Okay. This also applies to a field trip. If you want to send students on a field trip, you can't ask parents to pay like entry fees into a venue or to pay for food or anything like that. Of course, parents are welcome to send like money for souvenirs or something to that effect, but it can't be anything that's a requirement to participate in the field trip. That has to be fully funded with 21st century funds, or it could be donated by your community partners. Highly recommend you get as many community partners as possible, because sometimes they can really help you with funding things like food and things like that for your program. So speaking of food, this is new, and this applies to actually cohort 26. This decision was made after the last RFA, and it is going to continue for this new RFA. Typically, subgrantees are not allowed to use 21st century funds for food purchases during the academic year, including after-school snacks, unless that purchase is used as part of an approved cooking class, cooking demonstration, or a health nutrition education lesson. So if you plan on doing a cooking class and you need to buy food for that cooking class, that's fine, but you need to make sure that that is in your 21st century application and it's approved. You can't just on a whim decide that you're going to buy food and do a cooking activity one day without the State Department approving it. Okay. So the difference now is that, okay, well, let me say this one other thing first. For snacks, for after school snacks, you should reach out to your LEA child nutrition program to provide those snacks. Even if you are a community-based organization or a faith-based organization, you have to have a partnership with the LEA, and part of that partnership should be with their child nutrition program to provide those after school snacks. During the school year, child nutrition is allowed to provide 2 meals and a snack to each child per day. And so there should not be any problem with them providing your after school snacks for your 21st century program, but you do need to get that set up in advance and ahead of time and know that it's coming, okay? However, during the summer is a different situation. During the summer, a lot of LEAs don't run a child nutrition program. They don't run a summer feeding program. Some do, some don't. And so if your LEA or if the LEA of the schools you plan to serve is not serving a summer feeding program, then with pre-approval, you may be allowed to purchase breakfast and lunch and snacks for those students using 21st century funds, but it has to be pre-approved, and there's different steps that have to be gone through in order for you to do that. It cannot just be you decide you're going to do it one day without pre-approval. I had to not reimburse a school this past year because they didn't get pre-approval before doing it. It would have been allowed if they had just gone through those steps to get that pre-approval. The other situation that often occurs is that during the summer, even if an LEA is doing summer feeding, their CMP program is doing summer feeding during the summer, that CMP program is only allowed to give either 2 meals or 2 snacks or 1 meal and 1 snack. They can only do 2 what they consider meals per day. So they can't do like in the school year where they can do 2 meals and a snack. So we've had the issue come up where programs that were running from like 8 to 4, CMP provided breakfast and lunch, but then they weren't allowed to provide a snack. And so those programs were having to reach out to community members, trying to get people to donate snacks, and just becomes an issue. So we do still encourage you to take that as a first resort. If you can get your community partners to donate snacks, absolutely, that's what you should do. But if you can't, if you don't have enough community partners or they're not willing to do that for you, then you can get pre-approval to purchase snacks from using 21st century funds. And again, there's certain regulations that we ask you to go through. We ask you to, for example, we ask you to go through your CMP program to buy those snacks if possible. That way we know that they are nutritionally balanced the way that they're supposed to be according to the federal government. If that's not an option, we ask you to reach out to CMP programs in nearby LEAs that might be able to serve you. And then if that's not an option, then we can look at you purchasing those snacks from somewhere else, either a local restaurant or company, grocery store, Sam's, whatever. But again, this has to be pre-approved. You have to have a plan in place for how you're going to do that. I'm going over my time, so if you need to leave, we're continuing to record, so please feel free to step out if you need to. I'm sorry, I just want to make sure that I'm explaining everything really well, and I tend to ramble. I apologize for that. The last issue I can think of are for field trips. A lot of times during the summer, our 21st century programs will take students on field trips that may last several hours, many hours, because they may be traveling to the Tennessee Aquarium or something of that nature, maybe somewhere in another state or somewhere that's several hours away. And so they're going to be traveling during times when a meal needs to be provided. Sometimes you can work it out with your CMP program to provide sack lunches for those cases. And if you can do that, that's great. But just keep in mind that if it's something like a sandwich that has mayonnaise or anything like that, you would need to make sure that you store it. You have the ability to store it and keep it from going bad, keep the food from going bad. But we are open to you purchasing food during the field trip for students. But again, it has to be pre-approved. You have to tell us, you have to provide for us what your plan is. So for example, I know when I was a teacher, I took a group of kids to the Tennessee Aquarium, and as part of my, what I had to submit to my principal as our plans, I had to say, we're going to stop at exit 453, where there's four fast food restaurants right there together. We're going to park right here. The kids are going to get a ticket, worth however much money to go get their meal. They're going to bring it back to the bus. Like, I had to have a plan in place. And that's what we ask for you to have as well, as a plan in place as to where you're going to buy that food from. And of course, we want you to try to choose the options that are most affordable in the area. But again, we're not putting necessarily a money limit on it, because we understand that you may go somewhere where there is very few options. And if that's the case, you may have to spend more for a child's meal than you typically would have to spend if there was like a fast food restaurant nearby. So again, these are things that we now can justify allowing, but we have to be able to justify it, and we have to show that you did get that pre-approval and that there was a good justification as to why you needed to spend 21st century funds on food. Okay, next. All collaborative partners must be knowledgeable of the contents of the submitted application. The application should be written in collaboration with your partners and applicants. So if you're co-applying for this grant so that you can get that special priority, then you need to make sure that all of the collaborative partners helped write the grant, okay? And they are part of the planning, grant writing, startup, and implementation process. They need to be part of all of it. So any agreement that involves the school, which all agreements have to, I just realized that that's kind of a silly way to start that sentence, because all of them should involve a school. Because even if you don't plan to run your program in a school, you still need to involve a school, because you need to have a relationship with the school that the students attend. Your LEA or district superintendent of the school system you're serving, or his or her designee, and the principal of each participating school must sign an MOA that includes all of the roles and responsibilities associated with the partnership. So this is new. This next sentence is new. Principals must agree to participate in at least one mandatory training each year. We have found in the past that some principals are fantastic and great and on board, and they're super excited to have a 21st century program at their school, and some are not so much. And so we want there to be a time when principals have to come and talk with us, and we can kind of go over what 21st century is and how beneficial the program can be for the students that are at that principal's school. And hopefully that will help you guys get more support from the administrators, from the LEAs that you're working with. So that is a new requirement in this grant that hasn't been required in the past. But they do all have to sign an MOA, and it basically says what the responsibilities of each party are. So again, I keep referring back to CBOs, but this is usually where it ends up being an issue. So for example, let's say that you are a CBO and you want to provide transportation. You're going to have your program at a local school. You want to provide transportation, but you're a Boys and Girls Club and you don't have buses. So you need to you want to provide transportation, you need to work with that school system to for them to provide transportation. You can pay for it. You can pay for the bus driver salary, the extra hours the bus driver has to work. You can pay for mileage towards those buses to get those kids home, but you have to have a contract in place for that to be done. And so that all has to be agreed upon in advance. The other thing that has to be agreed upon is data. This is the biggest reason why you have to have a partnership with the LEA of the kids that the kids that you are serving are part of, because there is mandatory data that has to be pulled each year that has to be reported to the feds. And that data can only be obtained from your local education agency. So you would need like your student attendance data, You would need state assessment data. You need grades. It actually calls for GPA, or the grades from the current year and the past year. So all of that data has to be pulled. You also the LEA has to agree to mark those students as being 21st century in Power School. That's often an issue that we have, is getting, if you have a partnership between a community-based organization and an LEA, that community-based organization providing the LEA with a list of the students, and then having that LEA go in and mark those students as being 21st century in Power School. We are currently working on developing an API between Easy Reports, which is the system we use to collect data, and it's not necessarily Power School, but it's the State Department of Education's IT. And we're hoping the result of that will be that once a student is marked as being 21st century in Power School, their data will automatically upload into the Easy Report system starting the night that they're marked. And so that is going to be a really important key aspect of your agreement between the school system and any outside organizations, that they have someone that's going to go in and mark those students as being 21st century in Power School. All right, try to ramble this so we can get out of here. Here are some of the authorized activities. I'm not going to read through all of these. This is basically standard across all 21st century programs. This is straight from federal guidance. I'm trying to see if anything stands out to me as being different. Basically, these are all having to do with academics, STEM activities, tutoring, remediation, homework help. Please keep in mind that when you pick your activities, it should not, your after school program or your summer program should not look like your school day program. Can you talk about the same topics that were talked about during the school day? Absolutely. That is what we would love to see you do. But should it look exactly like school day instruction? Absolutely not. It should be fun. It should be entertaining. It should be hands-on. It should be a way to elevate the students' learning to the next level so that they can apply what they learned at school that day to like a hands-on experience, or to, give them an actual experience doing what they learned at school that day. That is like the ultimate goal. So keep in mind that when you do plan these academic activities, yes, you can have tutoring, and yes, you can have homework help, but that should only be a very small portion of your program. You should be doing fun, entertaining activities that address math and reading and English language arts in a fun way. Okay, that's what we would love to see. Is tutoring something that you need? Sometimes, yes, that may be the best thing that your students need. Do some of your students really need homework help because you know they're going to go home and their parents aren't going to be able to help them, or they may not be equipped to help them? Absolutely. If that's the need of the students in your community, then you can definitely have that, but it doesn't need to be the bulk of your program. Bulk of your program needs to be enrichment and fun activities, things that make kids want to be part of your program. Okay, here's some more authorized activities. You can have activities for limited English proficient students. Again, activities targeting adult family members, family literacy strategies. Okay, I'm gonna let you read through that. Programs that promote parent involvement, cultural programs, art programs. Here's kind of a new one that came out in recent grant guidance. This is actually new federal guidance. You can actually have instruction or enrichment activities that involve weapons, such as an archery class, or hunting, or shooting sports, or culinary arts. And when they say culinary arts, I'm pretty sure they're talking about knives and, using real knives to cut up food. You can have that. Just keep in mind that if you choose to have an activity like that, you're not going to be able to use 21st century funds to actually purchase like a gun, or a firearm of any kind. May consider allowing archery, bows and things like that, potentially, just because there's a lot more required in it's a lot harder to accidentally shoot a bow than it is to accidentally shoot a gun. Um, but if you do have anything involving a weapon other than like your culinary arts with the knives, then it needs to be off campus because most campuses have a no weapons rule. So you would have to plan to transport students for those activities off campus to a safe environment that is meant for that. So, like for example, I know Wetumpka, the city of Wetumpka has, as part of their sports complex, their new, fairly new sports complex, they have an archery range as part of that, and so they could transport students to that archery range as long, and just use safe practices to do archery lessons. You could take students to a shooting range that's made for that. But just please keep in mind that if you're going to do things like that, make sure that you have experts um, who can teach the kids safety, weapon safety, whatever the weapon may be, and that you have a pretty low student to teacher ratio so that you don't have any accidents take place. So just keep that in mind. You can do pre-approved field trips. Field trips, though, have to be to places that are not considered places that are typically for entertainment. This is kind of a change from in the past. In the past, we allowed field trips to a venue that would be considered usually an entertainment type venue if there was like a really good lesson plan to go with it. But the feds have really frowned upon this, and they have really expressed that they don't care if there's a good lesson plan to go with it or not. They don't want us allowing field trips to entertainment venues. And there have been there have been states that have gotten findings during audits for allowing field trips to entertainment venues. And so we just can't do that anymore. It has to be to a place that is obviously intended for educational purposes, like a museum or an aquarium or some sort of historical site, that sort of thing. It can't be a roller skating rink or a jump park. You can't say we're taking our kids to the roller skating rink and for physical fitness. Well, you just we're just not allowed to let you do that. I understand that skating is a good physical activity and it burns calories and all that, but you can do something on your campus that would burn just as many calories. So we just can't allow field trips to entertainment venues. No, of course, no Six Flags, places like that. No gaming, Dave and Buster's pops into my head. No place like that. It's got to be some places that are educational. We highly encourage you to, especially for your middle and high school students, to have career and job training programs. We had representatives from CTE come to the ACEA conference earlier this week, and they had some great activities for how you can work with your career tech programs to offer ways for students to expand on their career tech options after school or during the summer. And so I highly recommend that you look into that. We'll try to provide some more information on that coming up soon as well. You can also even offer elective high school courses, but they can't be required for graduation by the State Department of Education. So you can offer electives for students to catch up on their credit points, but again, it can't be one of the courses that are required for a diploma. So none of your Englishes or anything like that. Those are required courses. And of course, you can spend 21st century funds on professional development. Things you can't do. You can't support activities that occur during normal school hours. So, for example, if you're during the school year, you want to take a field trip, that field trip has to occur either after school or during the weekend or during a holiday. You can't leave early for the field trip during school hours. You can't, again, pay for anything whose sole or primary purpose is entertainment. So no field trips. you can't even things like renting a jump house to bring on site is not considered an allowable activity. Again, I understand it's fun for the kids, it's exercise, but that's still the purpose of those jump houses is typically for entertainment, not for physical fitness. And so that is something that is not allowed. You're not allowed to provide gift cards, gift certificates, or any other kind of monetary incentives for students. And you can't provide incentives for staff, such as bonuses, awards. You can't have a luncheon, anything like that. Something fairly new is that we now do allow very small incentive type items if you can justify the reason for them. So if it's like an award or something, but it's got to be very small, not monetary of any kind, no gift cards or anything like that. So it could just be like stickers, maybe an award, maybe not a banner. That's what's coming in my head, but some sort of like award that goes around your neck. I don't know why I'm drawing a blank on what these things are called. But you can provide very small incentives for students. You can even do things like maybe if your students read a certain number of books, you could provide them with a book they get to take home. As long as it's not anything that's tied to a large amount of money, it's got to be a minimal amount of money, and it can't be any kind of incentive that involves money of any kind. So definitely no gift cards, gift certificates, or anything like that. Now, can you get local organizations to donate gift cards and things to give out to students? Absolutely. You just can't spend 21st century funds to buy them. No activities that are considered religious. No activities associated with marketing other than recruiting student participants. And so like you can print, it's okay for you to do things like print a flyer to hand out at the school, but you can't like create a website or or put an ad in the paper or anything like that necessarily. Now you might be able to do like an ad for student participation, but you can't like market your school or your CBO. You can't pay for like your CBO or your school's website with 21st century funds. Okay. And then finally, you can't use 21st century funds for any costs associated with grant writing. So you can't use current 21st century funds to pay for someone to write your application for this new grant. And you can't pay for fundraising activities. You can have a fundraiser, but your fundraiser, you can't like purchase things with 21st century funds and then turn around and sell them to raise funds, right? So you couldn't have like a bake off and then have your culinary students bake cookies and then sell those cookies to raise funds for your program. That would not be allowable. Okay. Can community organizations, people donate things to your program? Absolutely. But you can't use 21st century funds to initiate those donations or that fundraising. I hope that's clear and understandable. You cannot hire someone else to run your program for you. You can't purchase buses or any kind of vehicles. You can't purchase, construct, or renovate a building. So sometimes things come up like a greenhouse. Can we buy a greenhouse? Well, usually I allow that, or we allow that if it's something that's portable and easily movable, but you would not be able to say pour a concrete slab for that and use 21st century funds to do that, to put that greenhouse on top of, because that would be considered construction or renovation. So you're not allowed to use funds for anything like that. You can't like repave the parent pickup line area with 21st century funds. That's not allowable. Okay. Everything that you do has to be temporary, movable, because frankly, if you don't get the grant again, the materials and supplies and equipment that you purchase, or the equipment that you purchase with 21st century funds is supposed to then go to another 21st century program if you don't get the funding again. So that's another kind of misconception that sometimes people have, is that, oh, we're going to get all this money and we're going to buy all this great stuff. And if we don't get the grant again, then who cares? Because now we have all this great stuff at our school. That's really not how it's supposed to work. If you don't get the grant, those items are supposed to go to another 21st century program within your LEA. And if there's not another 21st century program, then they can go to a Title I school and remain there. That would be the only way you would be able to keep those things, is if you had a Title I program and were able to use those items for that Title I program. Another thing that you just need to be aware of is that you can't purchase things for your 21st century program and then allow the school day teachers or school programs to use those items. When you purchase something for 21st century, it is supposed to only be for 21st century use. And so ultimately, if you are going to work with an LEA or a school, the best thing is if they have a space that they can give you to make kind of a 21st century space that you can store items in. I know that's not always possible for every school, but that is kind of that is preferable if possible, because when the items are not being used, they need to be locked up. They need to not be accessible to school day teachers or students, and they need to only be used for that 21st century program. And we've had issues in the past where we've had things purchased and then find them. I think recently one of our TAs found a tent that was purchased, I think, for a summer program, and the soccer coach or something was using it. And so that's not allowable. It has to remain for your 21st century program. Promise I'm going to finish soon. Okay, program accountability. There are a lot of requirements that you have to meet to stay in compliance with this grant that address accountability, performance reporting, your budget. There is compliance monitoring involved during 1 year of the program. You do have to do a yearly program evaluation and hire an external evaluator to do that. And we do try to provide technical assistance to you. And so when the RFA does come out, please read that carefully. And again, we'll go over that in the next meeting more carefully. There is certain data that has to be reported to the feds. That data is called the Government Performance, and it is for the Government Performance and Results Act. We call it GEPRA data. And that data, you have to have collaboration with your LEA to pull most of that data for you. And it involves academic achievement, grade point averages, school day attendance, behavior, and student engagement and learning. So teachers, for that part, the teachers have to be surveyed. So we need teacher information for those students as well. Supplement, not supplant, does apply to 21st century. And what this means is that anything you purchase with 21st century funds has to be supplemental to what you're already providing at your school or in your program. So if you are already currently having an after school program that's funded through something other than 21st century, then you cannot replace that funding with 21st century funds. You can add 21st century funds to what you're currently doing to supplement what is currently happening, but you can't replace. So unless the only way you can replace is if those funds are no longer available to you. So for example, the ESSER funds a few years ago for the COVID relief, one of the requirements was after school programming with those ESSER funds. But then when those went away, 21st century programs were able to step in, and you were able to use 21st century funds for after school programming, because the ESSER funds were no longer there. But if the source of funding is still available, you have to continue to use that, and then you can use 21st century funds in addition to that to provide a more robust after school program or summer program. So please keep that in mind. Part of the application is for you to report any after school or summer programming you're already doing and what funding sources you're using to support those programs. And so one of the things that we're supposed to check for is that you're not supplanting. So it's important that you provide us with all of that information. Other considerations. Please understand that if you currently have a grant, or if you've had a grant in the past, and you had major issues with compliance. You were constantly late. You didn't submit ES2s on time. You didn't submit items for your compliance monitoring. You didn't make sure that a final report was completed by an external evaluator. If there was just continuous issues and problems, then it may not be in your best interest of your time to apply for this grant. Because if we have had consistent issues with you in the past, then more than likely we are not going to allow you to qualify for a grant in this application. So just keep that in mind. And same with the continuation applications. Those are contingent upon you as a subgrantee meeting all of the requirements, the reporting requirements, that you've demonstrated progress towards meeting your objectives, the use of your funds, that you're not having huge amounts of carryover in previous grants, and not spending out your funds. All of those things could affect your application for the initial grant and then your continuation application years after. So I don't know that this has been really pushed in the past, but it's definitely being pushed now because it's something that the feds are pushing for us to do, and states who are being too lenient are being written up, are being given findings for being too lenient. So we're trying to do what we're supposed to do in this grant. So please help us by doing what you're supposed to do so that we can continue to give you this funding and not have any issues. Okay, there are some budget caps that you might need to be aware of. Your professional development costs may not exceed 10% of your grant award. Your cost for your external evaluator, this is slightly new, may not exceed $6,000 or 3% of the grant award, whichever is less. Okay, so the cap on what you can pay your external evaluators for this new grant is $6,000 tops. But I think that would be applicable to 3% of a $200,000 grant. If you get less than $200,000, then it would be, 3% of whatever you do get. So whichever one is less. Your transportation costs may not exceed 30% of the grant award, and then your administrative and indirect costs together may not exceed 30% of the grant award. Please keep in mind that every subgrantee, that is the organization that's applying for the grant, has to have a program director, but that program director job should not be a full-time position unless they are over 5 or more sites. Okay. And for that particular, because this is a person, think of a program director as almost like the superintendent of the school system. They are over everybody. They're over all the sites in that school system, over all the schools. Well, your program director is over all of your sites in your district. Whatever their salary is, that salary amount needs to be divided among all the sites that they're serving, that they're over. Okay. So best practice would be, charging up to equivalent of 0.2 or 20% of a full-time employee, what that full-time employee would make per site. So figure out if you have a program director, figure out what your LEA or organization would consider a full-time salary for that person, and then you could apply up to 20% of that salary per site that they're going to be over. There may be reasons we're not saying that is mandatory. That's just going to be best practice, and we're going to question if you don't follow that. But we do understand that there may be certain circumstances where you may have to have a full-time person in place and there's only 4 sites. But those are things that you would need to talk over with us, and that we can kind of look at the circumstances and decide if that's something that can be done. But typically a program director should not be a full-time position. Now, if you have, this is kind of new also, if you have more than 5 sites, if you have 6 or more sites, then you can hire an assistant program director to be over the additional sites, over the 5. You still need to have a program director in place. There still needs to be one person who makes final decisions on things, but you could have an assistant program director that makes slightly less per hour, and maybe over less sites. But that way we don't have program directors that are over 10, 12 sites and not being able to keep up with all the things that they're supposed to do. Each site must have a site coordinator. So you can think of the site coordinator as almost like a principal of the school. It's like the site coordinator is like the principal of the site. Again, this also should not be a full-time position. Actually, this is actually written wrong. Let me take that off. What this second part of this meant to apply to is each site must have a site coordinator unless the subgrantee only has one site. So let me move this actually, because that makes it sound like it can be a full-time position if there's only one site. Sorry about that. Let me just kind of go ahead and fix this right now. Sorry, hold on. I didn't realize that said it that way. Each site must have a site coordinator unless the subgrantee only has one site. Okay, so maybe this is a little bit better. If you only have one site, then you can just have a program director that serves in the capacity of both site coordinator and program director, if that's what you choose to do. But you can still have both positions if you choose to do so. That's just up to you and your budget. Okay, so I see a question popped up. If you have sites in multiple districts as a CBO, can you have multiple program directors? Again, you would have to, yes, but it would have to be more than 5. It can't be that, okay, we're a CBO and we're going to serve some students in Huntsville and we're going to serve some students in Montgomery and we're going to serve some students in Mobile and we're going to have a program director at each of those 3 areas of the state. That's really not, that wouldn't work. The only way that we're allowing there to be like an assistant program director is if there's more than 5 sites in an area, and it's just to kind of take off some of the burden off of the main program director who's supposed to be over everything. Because there still needs to be one person that's over all the sites. And those sites need to be in a reasonable amount of area from each other. I know we've had some issues in the past where we've had a CBO that served sites in 2 kind of different cities, and there was issues with their program director having to travel to both. But that's just kind of part of it, and we don't advise CBOs to do that. We advise you to try to serve sites that are fairly near to each other and not in multiple areas of the state. Okay, application budget. I'm almost done. This is the last slide. Also, just things to keep in mind regarding purchase services. If you plan to pay a vendor with federal funds, you do have to have a contract in place. In the past, we had MOUs, and then after the Cohort 26 grant was released, some things happened, some learning took place, and we actually realized that we weren't doing what we should be doing. Everything can't be an MOU or an MOA. Some things need to be contracts, and those contracts need to have specific federal provisions in them in order for you to meet the federal requirements, because these are federal funds. And so we will go over this in greater detail leading up to the grant, but just in a nutshell, anytime that an organization is contracting or partnering with an organization from outside of their organization and money is being exchanged, then a contract needs to be put into place. Okay. So for example, if an LEA is contracting with a art studio to come in and provide art lessons, then they need to have a contract in place that details exactly what is being provided by that vendor. How often are they going to come? How long would each session be? what materials and supplies are going to be provided, what is the hourly rate. Those are all things that need to be included in that contract. And then what is the total amount that contract can pay out over the course of a year. If an organization is contracting for services within their own organization, I'm trying to make sure I had this right in my head, and money is exchanged, you also have to do a contract in that situation as well. So an example of this would be if the 21st Century Program within an LEA is going to pay for transportation and work with that LEA's transportation department, they need to have a contract in place saying, this is how much we're going to pay for bus drivers, this is how much we're going to pay for mileage, et cetera, et cetera. That needs to be in place as well. An MOU applies when you are when you have an agreement with an organization and there's not an exchange of money. I want to say I'm saying something wrong. I'm so sorry. I'll go over this in much more detail in our next meeting. But there's just understand that there is certain things that we need contracts for and certain things that we need MOUs for, and we will go over that very carefully when we go over the RFA much more clearly, and we'll have that all in writing as well. We do ask to see those contracts and MOUs. You don't have to submit them when you do your application, but if you get the grant, you'll have to submit them within a certain period of time. And we do look at those because we want to make sure that what you're purchasing is reasonable, allocable, and allowable, and necessary, and that you're paying people to do a service. When you're paying a person for a service, it has to be, the federal guidelines say that you have to be paying them a salary that is near fair market rate for that position. And so if you're paying someone to come in and you're paying them an outrageous amount of money per hour to do something that typically would not make that amount of money, then that's something that we're going to question. Okay, so just be prepared for that. Finally, everybody does have to include in their budget a $900 yearly cost for Easy Reports, which is the system that we use to collect our data for compliance and for reporting, annual performance reporting for the feds. And applicants must budget funds for their program director and site coordinators to travel to Mobile for the mega conference during the summer, and attend at least a one-day mandatory training. We usually do that training on Thursday, but you're welcome if your budget allows, you can attend and we encourage you to attend the entire conference. And then finally, new this year, which should have been in last year's RFA, but I accidentally left it out, is applicants must also budget funds for the program director and at least 2 direct service staff members to attend the ACEA conference each year. And what I mean by direct service, I mean teachers or assistants, people that work directly with the students. We want them to come and get professional development because ACEA is kind of is really working towards making it a conference that's more about best practices. And who better to hear those best practices than the people who actually work directly with the students. So you have to at least provide, you at least have to pay for at least 2 of your direct staff to come, but you're welcome to have your entire staff come. We will allow you to close your 21st Century Program during those few days of the conference in order for all of your staff to come to the ACEA conference. But you do need to let parents know that at the beginning of the school year so they can find alternative places for their children to go in the afternoon. All right, so that's all we're going to go over today. I know I went way over the allotted time, but does anyone have any questions that they would like to ask now? I'm going to go ahead and put up again that that QR code so that if you didn't get a chance at the beginning to join the Cohort 27 listserv, you can use that cohort, you can use that code to join it now so that you can get emails and information about the grant as it comes out. Thank you, thank you. And that's it for today. Unless people have questions, I'm going to stay on a little bit longer to answer anyone's questions. Again, we've recorded this and we will post this to our YouTube channel as soon as we get the video from WebEx, which will be either today or first thing Monday. And we hope you guys have a great weekend and a happy Thanksgiving. We will see you for hopefully the next RFA meeting on December 1st. And it will be at this same link, the same WebEx link. All right, I'm going to stop sharing my screen now. I think.